I'm going to go ahead and get started with you lovely ladies. And just go ahead and I'm going to start off, folks that are joining us on this webinar, just introducing myself. I'm then also going to give you just some background information about our school, Madeline Island School of the Arts, and do a brief slideshow. And then I'm going to, in process and in order, introduce each one of these instructors by dyeing, by dancing, and by the stitch. And we'll be able to go through, sort of give an idea of what to expect with this workshop that we have at Madeline Island School of the Arts, September 23rd to the 28th this summer. So we'll get started right now. Just humor me for a moment. I'll take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about the history of Madeline Island School of the Arts and our current workshops around the country. We'll start the slideshow now. MISA, also known as Madeline Island School of the Arts, is the largest and is located on Madeline Island. It is the largest and only inhabited of the 22 Apostle Islands. The school has been in operations for 12 years, and it is considered to be one of the top ranked schools in the country. The privately owned 40-acre campus is an hour and a half from the Duluth airport, and then a quick ferry boat ride on beautiful Lake Superior. Once students arrive, island time begins. Highlights of our location include fabulous north-facing spacious studios designed for creating art. At Madeline Island School of the Arts, the food is as much a part of the creative experience as the workshops themselves. The meals are crafted with fresh local ingredients and offering a delightful range of flavors that cater to both comfort and nourishment. In this workshop, every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner will be catered to you on campus, providing hearty breakfasts with beautifully prepared dishes, as you can see, that reflect the island's local bounty. The menus are crafted with care to satisfy every palate. And of course, since you're on vacation, a homemade dessert is served at every meal to add just the right touch of decadence to enrich your creativity. And we can't forget that our state-of-the-art campus is located on Madeline Island, a truly magical and inspiring place. There are sprawling meadows, beautiful night skies, Lake Superior hikes, sandy beaches, and lovely lagoons. Inspired by this magical island, we wanted to extend our workshop season and provide more diverse settings. MISA has 3 other locations to choose from and a 4th in the works. We spend the winter at the luxurious dude ranch outside of Arizona called the Tonga Verde Guest Ranch. This location features 180 horses, a famous cowboy cookout, and sweeping views of the Rincon Mountains. We spend the spring in downtown Santa Fe, a few blocks from the historic plaza. This location features endless amazing restaurants to try for dinners, trips to local museums, including the Folk Art Museum, Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, and trips to Ghost Ranch. In the fall, we offer beautiful, that's all Tonga Verde, Tucson. Sorry about that, Maddie. This is also Santa Fe right here. There we go. Ghost Ranch. This is in the fall. We offer beautiful workshops in beautiful Bar Harbor, Maine. This location features oceanfront accommodations, well-lit workshop space, and crisp air, vibrant foliage, and lots of fresh seafood. MISA is excited to announce we'll be adding our 5th location in the late fall of 2025 on the Monterey Peninsula at Asilomar Conference Center. The location here features a beautiful refuge by the Pacific Ocean, beautiful walkways along the beach, and breathtaking sunsets. We hope that you'll consider taking one of our workshops for the full MISA experience. Thank you so much for your time. And please know we're always available to answer any questions to answer any of your questions. All right, I think that's way too much that you have heard from me. I'm going to start off by introducing our fabulous dyer, Malka Dubrawsky. She is a designer and an author that has a rich background in creating functional textiles and fabric design. She's written 2 books on quilting and fabric dyeing, Color Your Cloth, a quilter's guide to dyeing and patterning fabric and fresh quilting, fearless color design and inspiration. She has designed for major fabric companies like Moda, Robert Kaufman Fabric, and Robert Kaufman Fabrics. Her work focuses on hand-dyed fabrics using ancient techniques to achieve vibrant, lasting colors. In addition to teaching workshops across the country and online, she crafts unique quilts for clients, and that's a tongue twister, unique quilts for clients and resale. Her designs are known for their bold color choice and clean, simple aesthetics, which communicate clearly and powerfully to the viewers. Hi, Malka. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. My focus in this workshop is it's called the dye component. We are going to be focusing on making ombre fabrics that you will then take and into Irene's element and craft you'll dance with the wall there, and then Carson will show you how to finish that up with some amazing surface stitching. So I thought what I would do to kind of give you an idea of how this class works, or how my part of the class works, is to share with you kind of in very quick succession the presentation that I created when I first taught this class, which was it was during the pandemic, and I created it to teach as a virtual workshop. So I'm going to share with you, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you the actual presentation. But like I said, I'm going to run through it really quickly because it's really actually meant to last like 3 hours at least. It starts obviously with a little bio about me, but you already got that from Annie. So we're going to talk about color inspirations, because not only we're making a range of colors, but you also want to think about how colors interact with each other. Even though in our tonal fabrics we're only making a gradient range of one fabric. I'm also offering a kit for this class. If folks don't feel comfortable, there's obviously a supply list. If folks don't feel comfortable buying the materials themselves, and so that kind of helps, in terms of thinking about color and stuff. So there's a lot of talk about how you should think about color. Here's some examples just out in the world of gradient ranges. And then also how that can affect your work, your hand-dyed fabrics. And then some examples of stuff that I might have made. But we're pretty quickly going to get into the meat of how it is that we're going to dye this fabric. We are literally, the fabric will be prepped for this process, and we are going to be not only making a series of small sample pieces of each of our gradient ranges, but also making samples, three half-yard lengths that are samples of the entire gradient range of each of the colors that we have. I talk about the various materials that you use, even though it's in the supply list, but I'll talk about those materials as well. And I also give y'all a link to this PDF so that you can refer to it later on. When you get home and you're like, oh, I don't remember how to do this. Well, that's no problem, because you have all this information, which includes information about how to prep your fabric, what materials to get, how to make the print paste, or basically the medium that we're going to use to put the dye onto your fabric, how to make the concentrates of these dye colors, everything, including kind of like a step-by-step breakdown of this process. I have a couple of videos that are linked to this PDF and that I'll be demonstrating in class, but if you were to go back and look at it, you would see these videos that are available actually for everybody. They're on my YouTube site. So I'll kind of walk you through this entire process. And also a big part of this process is creating a swatch, I call it the swatch notebook, keeping record of what you've done, so that you could repeat it. So one of the things that Andy mentioned is that I do a lot of hand dyeing. I actually have a hand dyed fabric business. And so repeating stuff is like super important to me. And so I really emphasize that in the class. You want to understand how it is you made this color so that you can make it again. Because I don't like to be disappointed. I don't want you to be either. And so cute pictures of me holding up a Swatch notebook. And then this is kind of a sample of some of the fabrics we're going to be making. Like I said, we're going to make from the 3 different colors that we've got, we're going to make a series of smaller pieces, smaller swatches, okay? And they're bigger than swatches. They're like 8 by 10, like, paper size. But we're also going to make these lengths that are ombre dyed. And those lengths plus the swatches are what you're going to take into Irene's portion of this class and be able to, do the great kind of piecing that she's going to show how to do. Just in general, the PDF also includes some alternatives, because though we're not going to cover it in this class, down the road, if you were interested in kind of applying this process to different, say, fabric substrates, or you wanted to do more of a dye bath kind of approach, then I briefly talk about it in the PDF. But our focus here is what we call direct dye patterning. We're literally painting the color onto the fabric. The advantage of doing it this way versus doing it with, say, dye paint is that it doesn't change the hand of the fabric at all. And so your fabric is just as, it's got the same kind of drapes, same kind of, same kind of everything that it had before you applied the dye. And so it really, the advantage of using these fiber reactive dyes is that all of it is going to bind with the fabric. So it creates a color that's light fast, it's color fast, it's going to stay beautiful. These are fabrics that you're going to make, and then you'll be able to apply them to these projects, and you won't be, you'll have something that's going to be beautiful and stay beautiful. So that is essentially what we are going to be doing on my part of the class. So I hope you'll come.
Malka, that's amazing and beautiful as well as inspiring. The colors are gorgeous. I do want to remind everyone, if you have any questions at all while Malka, Irene, Carson are talking about their craft, please don't hesitate to put those in the chat box. We have a couple of MISA colleagues of mine are watching the chat box, and we'll certainly make sure that we can get any questions you may have answered. That is the purpose of this webinar. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the dancing part of this workshop. And our beautiful Irene Roderick, who has taught many workshops with us over the last couple of years. She comes to us with 50 years of artistic experience. Irene began her journey into quilting after retiring from an administrative role at the University of Texas in Austin. She holds a BFA from the University of Texas and an MFA from the California Institute of the Arts. Inspired by the works of Nancy Crow and Gwen Marsden, she discovered her passion for modern quilts in 2016. Since then, she has dedicated herself to creating functional art, treating her quilts as paintings with fabric as her medium. She has also, speaking from personal reference, done an incredible job of creating that with her students. I've seen it firsthand. Her work has been widely exhibited and recognized, including receiving prestigious awards at QuiltCon and Quilt National. Currently, she spends her day teaching workshops, presenting trunk shows, and working on a book about her signature improvisational quilting style, Dancing with the Wall. Welcome back, Irene. It's so lovely to see you. Please tell us all about what you're going to be doing with us in September on the island.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me here. And what I decided to show today, I'm going to show a little PowerPoint, and then I'm going to show you some of the quilts that I made. I took Malka's class on Zoom, probably the first one. And I actually took all those fabrics and I put them into my quilts. And so what I'm going to show you are the quilts that I made with what we're going to actually be doing in class. And so I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. And then we're going to make a little slideshow thing work here, maybe. Let's do this. All righty, can y'all see that? So basically, as Annie said, I'm an improv quilter. I started quilting a few years ago. I am actually a painter at heart, have always been a painter. These are some of my quilts here. And so I've always been an artist. I've always been creative. I've pretty much worked in every medium that there is except welding. I have done stained glass. I've built furniture and painted it. I do large scale paintings. I've done murals, needlepoint design. And then when I was 46, I got a chance to go back to school. And I have 4 boys. And as Annie said, I have my BFA and my MFA in painting. And so when I started quilting, I basically started just making paintings with fabric. And so what we're going to do in class is dancing with the wall, which is my method of improv. And we start in the middle of a design wall with a piece, with a shape, with something that we're going to make and dye. And then we're going to add it one piece at a time until we have an quilt made. And so this is my method. And it really, because we start with one piece and add one piece at a time, you don't just look at a design wall and go, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's actually step by step. And each time you make a step, then you step back and you look back and you respond to what you've done. And so it's a process, and it's not just a blank wall that you have to fill with stuff. So, all right. So what we're going to do now, some of these I made after Malka's class. So Malka's probably going, oh my God, we didn't do that in class. And she's right. But I was so taken with the process, and I love the way it works. And I love the fabric that we made, that I used it, and I still use it to this day. When I dye fabric, I use Malka's formulas. I know they work, and I'm comfortable with them, and they come out with these beautiful pieces. But then I kind of do stupid things like throw just dye powder on top and, yeah, kind of splash around a little bit. But so these are just 2 pieces, probably 1.5 yards of ombre. And if you see over on this side, this is the quilt that I made from these pieces. And so you can see how amazing it is to work with these graduated ombre type fabrics, how you get the lights and you get the darks, and they do amazing things. So this is another one. And these are the ones that we actually made in class. I know this one we did. The green one I probably did on my own. But I also, in these top sections of this is a guardian quilt. I use the little pieces that we made of the solid colors in those. And so I used both the ombres, but check the ombres. Look how beautiful they are. And then when you use them, look how they go, and then all of a sudden they go to light, and the light just glows. And I love that effect with these kinds of fabrics. So you can tell I did these right before I started the Guardian collection and series. And so this one we did in class, and I think we're going to use this as indigo. I think we're going to use indigo again. And I started this with just sticking these pieces up on the design wall. And then I cut them down into different sections, but you can see I also have some of the terracotta in here that we are going to be using, I think, and this gold. But look at this piece here, this orange, where it goes from dark to light. Look at the light that you get into there. And look how they kind of disappear in the center, and they're just so fun to play with. Look how just these little sections just glow. Okay, I'll go through faster. Now, this is obviously back on my own because it's purple and green, and put things up on the wall. I kept playing with them. I would throw, different textures on top, different powders, but I used them almost exclusively for almost a year. This is another one. These we did in class. This is the terracotta. And then this one I did by using, I think, the indigo to the gold. And so we have this color range that are more in the turquoises. So that's also, from what I understand, a possibility if we've got, primary colors to play with. And this one over here I put in because I took Marsha Dursey fabric and did the same technique on a print. And so, because I really love the way that they go from dark to light back to dark again. So I made my own ombre prints using this same technique. This piece, remember the gray at the very beginning? This is what was left over from making that first piece. I took all those great big kind of leftover arcs and put them into a piece, but I really like to show this part here where I use the oranges and the gray together and how they create this very interesting effect. Now here's some more. These are hand dyes. And so if you're not sure about whether you want to dye fabric or not, these are pieces that I have used only hand dyed fabrics in. This is more of an indigo, but you can see against a dark, these backgrounds are also hand dyed. These are yardage that were hand dyed, and they have a gorgeous kind of aesthetic to them and texture to them. But look what the light does bouncing off those dark pieces. And then look over here how the colors bounce off of these dark. And so you can see each of these sections that look a little bit different. Those are different fabrics dyed in different dyes. But look how cool that effect you can get by using hand dyes. This one was a whole cloth, and I showed this one because I had it on the wall and I loved it, but I didn't want to cut it up because I would mess up the gradation. And over on this one, I used the gradation and didn't really mess with it, but I had to use it. And so I started cutting it up, and look what happens. You get these really cool insets that are kind of the same color, but a little bit different. And so you get a beautiful effect playing with these hand dyes and the gradations that we're going to make. This is just another piece I made out of, and then I'm going to finish up here. This is the class I taught earlier in June because I wanted to show you the workshop. These are where we'll be working. Look outside at those great big windows and you can see outside and the deer. And we all have these wonderful design walls that are full size. Everybody gets their own. You get your own table. It's an ideal workshop situation. We have ironing stations, we have cutting stations, we have trash cans, and we have never ending, which I'm not sure this is a positive, never ending chocolate chip cookies, and a refrigerator that is resupplied magically overnight with drinks, with waters, with sodas. And so I just wanted to show what an amazing space that we have to work in. And that's it. I'm going to now, let's see, but we're going to turn it over to Carson.
So, hi. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I had a quick question for Mal. Thank you, Irene. I really appreciate that. In the studio space, that was such a treat to see those pictures of you from earlier in this year. Thank you for sharing that. I had a quick question for, I think it was for Malka. They're wondering if that information that you had was downloadable.
It's not downloadable. It's something that I send out to all my students once they take the class. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hope that answers for Angela out there. I hope that that answers your question. I think she was wondering, and I'm not sure if Angela's registered for the class, but if you are, you will certainly receive those handouts. Thank you, Malka. All right, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our last but not least, our die dance stitcher. Carson Converse is an artist and designer who specializes in textile art, particularly quilt making, with a background in sculpture and a master's degree in interior design. Her work is deeply influenced by minimalist artists like Rothko and Agnes Martin, as well as the landscapes of Western Massachusetts, where she lives. Her creative process is experimental and fluid, resulting in minimalist composition that reveals layers of complexity over time. Carson's award-winning quilts have been featured in exhibits both nationally and internationally. Welcome, Carson. We're so excited that you are here. Please take it away.
Great. Share my screen.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Mhm.
I know. If only Zoom had a sound button for everyone.
Oh, resume share. Okay.
We'd be
Let's see.
oohing and eyeing. All right, I'm going off.
I'm just trying, well, I'll start talking, but actually, it's telling me my screen share is paused. Let me just try to restart that. Because I don't think.
We can see your screen, Carson.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure I'll be able to move it when I
I'm gonna say it has to be paused. That was a great slide to pause it on. Those are.
yeah. I'm gonna just try. There we go.
Yay!
All right. So I wanted to start with these quilts. They're actually a little bit, they're early quilts. The one on the left is from 2010. And then the one on the right I completed in 2017, and it shows a progression of the way I think about quilting my quilts. When I made the quilt in 2010, I was still very much a top maker. So when I was thinking about quilts, very much thinking about them as graphic design, and I would design them on a design wall. My process is actually similar to Irene's. I move things around on the design wall and play with compositions on a wall. And once I got the top done, to me, it felt finished, but it wasn't a complete quilt. And I always was kind of stumped on what to do next with, and I was afraid that I was going to just destroy my quilt once I added quilting. This particular quilt was one of the first ones where I actually focused on the quilting, and that was because there was so much negative space. Because before this, I would just stitch in the ditch, or I would outline the shapes, which you can see on the lower portion of that quilt. But because I had the negative space, I had to actually start doing something with it. And that forced me to start thinking about the quilting a little bit more. And then I got really excited about it, and it started becoming something that over time, I started thinking about earlier and earlier in the process of making quilts. So by 2017, I actually picked up, I had blocks left over, and I created another top using the exact same fabric, exact same blocks. And this time, not only was my skill level higher on the echo quilting, which is on the white, I was thinking about differences between the background being stitched a little denser, having the foreground stitched a little bit less dense so that it popped forward. So I started thinking about the volume of the quilt in addition to the color fields of piecing, and thinking about how to sort of enhance my piece tops using quilting. At some point, and the way my process works, I'm just always paying attention to the process as I go. So a lot of times my next quilt is actually inspired by something that happens while I'm making the previous quilt. So for example, the quilt on the left is actually the back of another quilt. And I normally would have matched my thread color to the fabric, but in this case, the front was a light colored fabric, and I didn't want the dark pokies of my bobbin showing through to the front. So I used a light color. And then that's sort of how I discovered that I liked contrasting thread and I liked these stripes. And so that's something that then, and I'll show it in the next slide, it's paying attention while I'm working kind of encourages the next quilt. And then I started playing a lot too with thread color and thinking about how can I change the color of the fabric using thread. So if we have some of these beautiful hand-dyed fabrics, maybe we only have one color of ombre that we're working with, but we want to kind of shift the color a little bit. We can start to use thread to add more colors to our quilts. And we can change that color based on the color of the thread and also the density. And this is an example of a quilt, again, inspired by the back of that previous quilt. And this is a whole cloth quilt. It is one solid fabric. The variation of color comes from thread. There's 6 different colors of thread here. Wow. And the thin lines are areas where I didn't stitch. So throughout the years, been trying to think about not only the stitching that I'm adding, but what happens when I don't add stitching. So what sorts of shapes can I get where I don't stitch, and what sort of color can I get where I do stitch? So we'll talk a lot about that in the class, and things that I've learned as far as sort of the way thread interacts with the volume of the quilting, because it's not just like drawing a line on a piece of paper. There's this sheen and volume and shadow that you're also dealing with. This is one of my quilts that in some ways is similar to what we're doing in the class. This uses hand-dyed fabric. It's improv pieced, and the quilting was, and I did it step by step too. So I dyed I'll dye the fabric, and then I will piece it just like we'll be doing in the class. In this case, I hadn't thought about quilting, and then I got to the quilting and I was looking at the shapes of the piecing and thinking about how I could quilt it in a way that would make it a little bit more exciting, because quite frankly, the top wasn't that exciting, but also have a visual language that made sense with what the top was. And in this case, I did an all over design because I didn't want to spend the time kind of getting fussy in little areas. So I just kind of put a veil over the top. And also this quilt, again, is somewhat similar to what we'll do in class. These are hand-dyed fabrics. I did use paint in this case in a very similar way that we'll be applying dye. As Malka said, it does add a stiffness to the fabric, but in this case it's a metallic and I wanted that sheen. But very similar process of painting on the fabric. And then once I had the fabric, it was pinning it up on the wall, kind of moving it around, figuring out where it went, and then trying to figure out quilting. And in this case, it's matchstick quilted, 2 different colors of thread, and they're about 1/2 inch. Each area is about 1/2 inch of stitching, so about I think it's like 1/32 of an inch spacing on that. So my own practice is a little different because at this point now, I've practiced thinking about the quilting from the start, and I've actually moved on to whole cloth quilts, which is of course different than what we'll be doing in this class. But when I work on quilts for clients, it is a lot more of the process that we'll be following in this class, and where you have a top, you've made the top, you're really attached to the top. You may have things that you like about that top. You may have things that maybe aren't working, haven't been resolved yet. And quilting is a great opportunity to kind of continue what we've been doing in Irene's portion of the class, continue thinking about how things move, or how the eye moves around your quilt top, balance, a lot of art, visual theory, and how can we sort of enhance that and keep going with that process as we quilt. And so this particular quilt that I'm showing it's a client quilt. The pattern's by Amy Friend. And in this case, the client really liked the pattern of the seam lines in the white. So she had actually designed this quilt on a dark design wall. So the whole time she was designing this quilt, she was seeing the shadows from the seams. And so she wanted to keep that effect, but her seams weren't the neatest. So I didn't want to put it on a black batting. And so the quilting was sort of designed to enhance the white on white seams and provide interest in between these shapes. And also I'll say that the thread was picked to be sort of a light pink. I didn't want anything too bold, but there's a little bit of red somewhere else. So pulling red from other areas of the quilt. So for the class, there'll be a lecture portion. We'll talk about some of these formal things. We'll talk about the way thread sort of looks depending on the density that you're stitching, different types of movement that you can get, regular and irregular sort of quilting lines, and what might work for your quilt. Then we're gonna look at your quilt top. We're gonna, and this is probably at this point a continuation of what you've been doing with Dancing with the Wall, but we're gonna look at the quilt top, figure out what types of lines there are, what types of shapes, and what types of, how that would translate into quilting. And then we will create a lot of sketches. So on your list, there's trace paper. And I love trace paper because it's cheap and you can see through it. And so you can just really quickly draw one-to-one, sort of sketch out some ideas for quilting. So ideally, I really encourage people to try a lot of different ideas, not to get too attached to your first idea. So I'm going to really push you to really think about different ways that you can quilt your quilt. And we'll also create some samples. So we'll use some of the extra fabric, maybe some blocks that don't make it into the quilt, and we're going to test some color. So we'll try to see different colors of thread and how that interacts with the fabric you have. And then of course we'll get to stitching your quilt. I don't know if in 2 days you'll be able to finish stitching your quilt, but hopefully it's far enough along that you know where you're heading. And we've sort of troubleshooted and figured out and been able to help you with any issues you might run into. That's it for me.
Cool.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carson. I had a quick question, and it's so funny. I was thinking of the exact same thing. I was going to ask you myself, but then Angela popped in and she said, she's curious about what machine you use for your quilting. And also, what's the thread weight? You mentioned you use different types of thread. What's the most common thread weight do you find yourself using?
Well, answer the machine first. And I'm now using an Innova long arm, but I have a Janome domestic, and some of these quilts were quilted on the Janome domestic. So I've taught classes for walking foot straight line stitching. So that sort of knowledge base will definitely come into this class. Thread weight, I use a lot of different thread. I would say 30 to 50 weights, probably the most common. But I'll use synthetic. I like shiny, I like gold, I like Orifil cotton. So
would you suggest folks bring a little bit of everything?
Yeah, I would bring what you feel comfortable bringing, because we have a little bit of a disadvantage of being last. So we don't really know what you're going to want, but I will say I think that might create opportunities from really wonderful surprises, because you'll have to work with what you have. And in my experience, sometimes the best new growth comes from that. So, but if you bring stuff you know works in your machine, that would be the one thing I would say.
I agree. The wonderful surprise of, using what you have is always, it always works out in the best way possible. I had another question for you, and that was about the batting. What do you like to use for batting for your quilts?
I would recommend, for purposes of this class, probably something that's a denser batting. So I use Quilter's Dream. I like the select weight, but I wouldn't bring a puffy. I think people will get frustrated for this class. But if there's a preferred batting students like and they're familiar with, I would bring that.
Okay, thank you. All right, humor me for a second. I have some fun questions that I want to ask each one of you. Is that going to be okay? You guys ready for this?
Carson needs to quit sharing.
Oh.
There, now we can see you. Okay.
Oh boy, I would much rather see Carson's quilt than my face up front and center, but that's okay. Okay, so I would like to ask this question to, I'm going to ask this question to Malka. How do you see your own creative process evolving through teaching, and what are you looking forward to discovering alongside your students with the dyeing process?
I don't think I've ever taught a dyeing class where I didn't walk away. Somebody did something different than the way I do it, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. I might try that, So I think for myself, it's always that surprise. I think like probably everybody here, I like surprise, and it makes you, especially when you've done something a lot, no matter how much you pay attention, you kind of get into, this is my mode, this is the way I do it. And then somebody comes along and takes your exact process and does it in a completely different way, and it makes you see it anew. So that's what I mean, I get a lot out of that. So
That's great. I mean, it is. And with the dyeing part, there's so very little control you have over it.
Right.
And that's the best part about the dyeing. I'm so thrilled. I'm excited to see how this all comes out. You are the expert in this. Okay, my next question is for Irene. What do you hope participants will take away from your workshop, both in terms of skill and creative mindset?
Well, first of all, we will talk a lot about design as we design. And so as far as skill set, we're going to be doing piecing. And so we will be piecing curves. We will be piecing thin lines. We will be piecing unusual shapes. And so how do we tackle those kinds of areas while we're making our quilt? Because as we're designing them, we're not going to be paying much attention to sewing it together until we have it mostly designed. And so you will learn how to take very complex kind of ideas and actually be able to make them and create them. And one of the things I was thinking about that people might have questions. First of all, the workrooms are open 24/7, which is good to know. And we are making a piece that's going to be about 30 by 30 or a little bit smaller. So it's not a huge quilt. Because the other thing might be, well, how are we going to finish a piece in 2 days? And the reality is, yes, we can. I've been teaching a lot, and students are finishing pieces in 2 days with no problem. And we will keep the designs fairly simple. And so we don't get involved in the weeds. So I will be there at all times, making sure that we don't end up with things that are impossible to make. And so I forgot the rest of your question.
What they'll take away from this workshop, both in terms of skills and creative mindset.
On the creative mindset, we will talk a lot about design and about movement and about shape and about line and how these things fit together and how designs change based on where the colors. And we will talk about value a lot, because that's pretty much what we're going to be working with is fabric that are 8 different values, 12, 7. So.
Sorry, I muted myself. Six different values.
Oh, 6 different colors. I can't read. Yeah. I won't bring my glasses. And so, yeah, we will talk a lot about value and how value works and how secondary shapes are made by putting different pieces together and different values in different places. And so it will be a kind of a crash course on design.
Amazing. Okay, lastly, Converse. Carson, I'm sure everyone calls you Converse too. I think your name is fabulous. Carson, you mentioned you were skilled as a sculptor and an interior designer. How do you feel that kind of, how you're basically, what is that particular source of inspiration that you're currently exploring? How do you put that into your quilt in textile? How does that influence what you do with your design?
Well, I think recently I realized that my quilts have been getting flatter, and I think realizing that I am a sculptor and thinking about the volume of a quilt, and so thinking a lot about the sort of puffiness of a quilt and the way that light hits it. And so that comes in varying densities of quilting, and really paying, in some ways, what you see when you're quilting is the negative space. You're not seeing the stitch as much as you are the puff. And so thinking about that, thinking about the way material catches light, and then also thinking about alternative materials, which in this class comes in, I would say, mostly in thinking about different types of thread you can use. So if you bring some shiny thread versus some matte thread, just noting how the light catches that differently.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. I'm just looking here to see if we have any other questions. Irene, you had wonderfully mentioned that the studios are open 24/7. Class typically runs from 9 to 4 each day with lunch, an hour break for lunch or so. But again, Irene, we typically find that students tend to want to stay in the workshop as long as possible. And they certainly have wonderful lighting and spacious and wonderfully temperature controlled rooms for people to work in as long as they'd like to. It's hard to leave those classrooms, I find, sometimes once you get started.
Well, and there are people that are morning people that will come in at 6 in the morning and work till breakfast. Coffee, I think, is on at 7.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. You're hired. Yes, you're right, Irene.
Okay, and then breakfast is at 7:30. I have that memorized. But then there are those night owls who really would rather kind of do something in the morning, go exercise, go walking, go swim, and come back and come in. And I was one time staying across and I could see the workroom. And I think the last time I saw the light on was at 2 a.m. So people will go over after dinner and work. And so you have a lot of time and a lot of place because it's a gorgeous campus and it's set up to allow us to work as much as we want to at our own pace. Yeah.
One last question for you, Irene, is, how do you embrace the uncertainty and stay open to the unexpected when creating improv?
Well, that's kind of the point. For me, I do what Malka mentioned. We love surprise. I love surprise. I love to put something on the wall and step back and expecting it to be doing something, and I step back and it does something completely different, and it just blows my mind, and the hair on the back of my neck stands up. I live for that feeling. Yeah. And so for me,
I can tell, and your students do as well, Irene. We were lucky enough to have you here back in June, and I mean, every day when I walk into that classroom, every day something different and more inspiring and more abstract and unexpected would turn out onto these students' quilts. And you pushed them and they were so happy. I didn't see anyone crying.
No crying class. There's no crying in improv quilting.
Smiles and pure joy, and everyone is so supportive of everyone else in these workshops. It's just such an intimate, immersive experience here on the campus. So and the fact that it's just going to be you guys here that week is really special. We do talk about having other workshops cross-pollinating when we're here at other times, but because each one of you are giving such a different, unique aspect to this workshop, it's almost like we have 3 different workshops going on. So it's going to be really impressive and exciting to see what everyone produces. And I know that the 3 of you work so well together. It's just, having these multiple instructors, is such a unique experience and so wonderful. And it doesn't happen very often in most places. So we're really thrilled to have you guys and we can't wait. I just want to remind everyone about the date. The Die Dance Stitch Workshop, which is curated by Irene, Malka, and Carson, will be offered September 23rd to the 28th this fall on Madeline Island. And there is still a couple spots available to sign up. You can be a day student if you have friends on the island and wanted to stay somewhere else. The option is there as well. But you're not going to want to miss the amazing meals that we have here on Madeline Island. It's truly, the fresh vegetables and local flavor are delicious. And I think if we don't have any other questions, I think that about wraps it up for us today. And do you guys have anything else you want to offer?
No, we just look forward to kind of doing this. And first of all, also I'll be in the classroom, all of us every day. So Carson and I both have done fabric dyeing. I've worked with Malka. Carson's taken my class and Malka does improv quilting as well. I can't wait to hear what Carson has to say. I'm really excited about that part. But we'll all be there every day. And so there'll be a lot of support.
I have one last question that came in for Malka. Here we go before we sign off. Malka, are you ready for it? Your work is known for vibrant use of color and pattern. How do you approach color selection in your dyeing process? And what influences your choices when creating a new palette and design?
Wow, that's a great question. I think I've always been influenced or inspired by other textiles. I mean, that when I look back at what really, I'd love to say that it's nature. I love nature as much as the next person, but I think it's always like other textiles, and I too, like both of these ladies, have a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and so kind of the kind of works from the past. So I would think that inspires me too. I do a lot of looking. I mean, one of the, there's a lot of maybe not so great things about the internet, but one of the great things is that you've got so many opportunities to see other artists' work and other ways people use color, and to kind of collect that for yourself. So I feel like I do a lot of looking, and my palette changes. It goes from being, I think that, yes, for many years I was known for a lot of bright colors, but it's definitely become much more muted, much more neutral, much more earthy in the past few years. So like people in general, your color palette changes. So I think that kind of being aware that they're being open to the fact that it's going to change, I think that's important too.
That's wonderful. Thank you. All right, ladies, it's been a pleasure having you here on this webinar. I'm so glad we were able to schedule a time for us all to get together. We're looking forward to seeing you here in September. Again, Madeline Island School of the Arts. You can see Carson, Malka, and Irene on the island. It's on our website. Register today if you can, and we will see you guys in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, everyone. Thank you. Take